Welcome everyone to today's important and valuable webinar on industrial cybersecurity in the railway sector. I'm Lorraine Lumpkin, your host for this session, and I'm delighted to see all of you here today. Today, we've gathered some of the brightest minds and leading experts in the field of industrial cybersecurity, specifically focusing on the railway sector. Our distinguished speakers will share their invaluable knowledge, insights, and experiences with you over the next 40 to 45 minutes, ensuring that we have some time for Q&A. Before we proceed, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to join us. Now let's take a look and take a glance at the agenda. We'll be covering the current dynamics shaping the rail industry, impacting the need for heightened cybersecurity efforts, recent regulatory changes, and compliance requirements, best practices, and some solutions to help you ensure you're in compliance. And as I said, time for Q&A. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to actively participate by asking questions using the chat feature. And the speakers will answer your questions as they come in and toward the end of the webinar. Without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our speakers today, who will each give a brief introduction before we jump into the content of the webinar. Alex, would you like to start and then pass it to Dino?
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Clark. I work within Cisco's IoT specialist organization. I am in a group of vertical specialists. I'm aligned for transportation, all modes, public and private. We're looking at big picture challenges that our industries are facing and making sure we're bringing the breadth and depth of Cisco industrial solutions to these markets. I spend my time working with airlines, with railway operators, with roadway operators, car manufacturers, etc., looking at big challenges in the space. Glad to be here today. Dino?
Thanks, Alex. Yes, my name is Dino Busalaki. I'm one of the founders for Velta Technology. We're a systems integrations group specializing in OT cybersecurity. We work across many verticals, the rail sector being one of them, but we also work with other critical infrastructure organizations and manufacturing. So our organization works with groups like Cisco Systems leveraging their technology to deploy in industrial environments and providing cybersecurity measures around those control systems.
So I guess I'll get started here with a bit of a broad view, and then we'll hone in specifically on the topic here today on cybersecurity for railway and sort of up-leveling the baseline following the CISA guidance and the need to secure the enterprise, and share some trends and industrial challenges that we're seeing in the space. And Dino, I'm sure, will share some more specific guidance on the TSA mandates, and then some best practices to follow to secure the environments. But really, from a broad perspective, we're seeing this underlying need for cybersecurity touching everything that matters going forward in how our transportation customers are running the business, right? We're looking at a generational opportunity for infrastructure transformation, and we need reliable connectivity everywhere. And the perimeter is gone, right? We have things in the cloud, we have things on-prem, we have things at the edge, we have different modes of transportation, different technologies maturing quickly, and we need to adapt and transform the underlying infrastructure, the network, the digital layer, to make that work. As we bring more connectivity into the physical world, we can't take one step forward and two steps to the side. We have to do it in concert with the security fundamentals of securing everything from the edge of the track all the way to the cloud, onboard the locomotive, onboard the rolling stock, to the signaling systems, all the way through our business applications that the customers rely on to book and pay and travel. And as we transform the infrastructure and secure the enterprise, we can look at other big movers to our businesses, like changing how our applications work, leveraging the new world with hybrid work, etc. If we keep going with me here, so if to double click on that theme, there's lots of great investment being made into the transportation market. It's a really exciting place to be. Cisco is been in the market here for 37 years. We're working with thousands of customers around the world. And we try to bring a bit of a horizontal view of where are the underlying technologies that support the modernization of this space, whether it's the secure digital infrastructure, different ways of operating our transportation systems, bringing in better visibility, both cyber and physical, connecting the workforce that is now distributed and all over the place, and working for passenger and cargo experiences with people flow and mobile experiences. The point of this conversation is not to talk about all of that, but to underline that as we move forward with this opportunity, we have to bring the best practices that we've really solved or solved better in IT. We have a responsibility in these critical industries to do it right by bringing the best practices into the physical world. And that's what we do at Cisco IoT, the industrial connectivity portion of Cisco. It's a big growing business, and our mission is squarely focused on making sure that the future that we're building is safe and agile. So we see this across a number of markets, right? Our utilities customers, our manufacturing customers, our oil and gas customers are all working towards this same end. And so we're happy to share best practices that are aligned to global guidance and aligned to well-known ways of solving for this that are specifically applicable to solve for visibility, security, visibility, response, and detection in this environment. And let's call a spade, right? Nothing is done once. Security especially is not a point source thing. You check a box and say, I'm done. It's a journey. And as our transportation customers in all these different modes, and rail is not unique in this, it's a journey towards fully connected environments. The good news is, in general, the railway sector is more connected than other parts of transportation, but we're always improving. It's a continuous improvement into all of the network infrastructure so that we can build for flexibility and we can build for the adaptability into that environment. On that journey, there are significant challenges. There's technology challenges. There are legacy device challenges. Transportation in particular has a longer tail than most other industries of old protocols, old networks, brownfield environments that we need to integrate to while we modernize and build networks of the future. So on that journey, there are challenges. What we see from a security perspective is the fundamental thing that we need to do when we connect IT and OT is provide common visibility so we can apply those best practices, we can apply those frameworks. But visibility is the number one thing we see right now in transportation as the challenge in connecting IT to OT. And as we look at railroading across the globe, whether cargo or passenger, there's lots of places, lots of threat vectors. They are different, they are changing, and we know that this industry is critical to the operation of the global economy and critical to our cities and our states and our countries. So it's imperative that we do it right, and we work out on how do we bring new technologies like advanced sensing, eventual automation safely into that environment, but do it where in a secure and agile way. So as we look into some best practices that we'll talk about here today on globally aligned frameworks, we've been developing connected rail architectures for the last 20 years and iterating on these because nothing, as I said, is done once. It's a journey towards continuous improvement and making sure that the digital infrastructure on which we're building our future businesses is safe and secure. And a double click on a couple of the challenges we're seeing, and this is across a number of our industrial segments. Transportation these are true here too. Everybody is concerned about cybersecurity. That's why we're all here today talking about this. And visibility is the number one challenge. We've built lots of networks through many different procurement models in many different geographies over a long period of time. And no matter what and how skilled your organization is, there is a challenge in visibility. Protocol visibility, geographic visibility, segmentation, it's challenging. And we're seeing new business models with outside vendors changing to as-a-service models with remote experts. It's a complicated landscape, and these are challenging things to connect IT and OT together in order to achieve the goals that we need. So we're trying to solve for security that is correlated with complexity. We have lots of different connectivity types, many different management tools. Scaling is hard. And so we'll talk today about some techniques that Cisco is able to help you with in solving the cybersecurity challenge and helping scale it faster than other solutions that are in the market. Getting to scale and getting to fully connected and fully secure infrastructure is critical. And as Dino will share, in transportation and others, there's just a lack of resources in the market to do this. And so we partner very closely with companies like Velta to take the technology that Cisco can manufacture and develop and tailor it and land it inside an organization that needs it. And really, these are the top three challenges we see in barriers to getting to the secure infrastructure that we all need. And if we zoom out a little bit broader, big trends that are affecting all of our industrial customers, including transportation, are the move to the cloud. It's not going back. We are going cloud native or cloud partial. We are already reliant on it, and it is a secure place to run certain workloads. Everyone is somewhere on that journey to the cloud, and that brings different sorts of challenges. There's sort of a concept no longer of cloud versus on-prem, but my trusted network versus somebody else's network. And my trusted network does include some things in the cloud, some things on-prem, some things at the edge, and different applications need to move around that. So we need that agility. But we are seeing all of our industrial markets embracing cloud at some level. We are also seeing this confluence, and COVID accelerated it, but it was happening way before that, is really bringing IT and OT together. It's not always easy, but connecting things like industrial control systems or critical assets that run the business to the enterprise networks, because there's an economic and a performance imperative to do so. So we see these things coming together that were traditionally siloed. When things are siloed and they're brought together, it brings different risks, different cultural challenges, but this is accelerating and it won't stop. And we see the mobility issue, meaning we have COVID accelerated it, but this was happening before as well, with remote users, experts that we need to run our business, whether they're our employees or they're outside contractors or partners that we're leveraging, need to connect to our things to make our businesses run well. And we need to make sure that no matter where they are, they can connect to the work that they need to do safely and securely, whether that's coming in through the cloud, whether that's inside the enterprise, or it's out in the field with hard hats and steel toes on. So the perimeter is gone. The threat vectors are big. It could be really big and scary, but this is where the world is going. And at Cisco IoT, we bring that industrial edge to the best practices and the solutions that Cisco has been developing for the last 37 years. So I think with that, Dino, let's hand it to you as an expert, a practitioner in the space, and share what you're seeing with some regulatory changes here.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Well, I just want to step through a little bit on the directive, right? So the TSA, issued this directive because of the ongoing threat to surface transportation, right? Due to safety and economic harm that could be caused by disruption of these critical infrastructures. So they developed these mandates that you see here. And many of you as operators probably have seen this information and have already enacted plans. I know some of the rail operators we work with have started down this journey to begin to demonstrate and implement a TSA security plan, as far as setting up, if something happens, to have access to somebody 24/7, 365. How do you report to the CISA group, and then have a cybersecurity plan, response plan, and then conduct vulnerability assessments, which was really one of the things that we do with the tool sets that Cisco provides, is really getting into how do you get your hands around 150,000 miles of rail track and thousands of rail yards, terminals, and depots with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of assets scattered around the country, right? How do you get your baseline and understand what's the vulnerabilities associated with those? And that's part of what our group does as practitioners, is going out and doing that hunt to find those assets and get them into a baseline tool like Cisco CyberVision, and assess the vulnerabilities within those assets and determine what's communicating with what, so you can start meeting some of these mandates that are coming down from the TSA. Next slide. And so there's security frameworks out there that we can follow, right? NIST being one, IEC 62443 being another one for industrial control systems. But the number one tenet in the NIST framework is identification, right? Which gets back to that asset inventory. How up to date is that asset inventory do you have, right? And is it something that you're continuously collecting information on, or is it a snapshot in time, right? Both in the manufacturing space and in the critical infrastructure space, we're starting to find organizations starting this journey. And there's a slide coming up that kind of describes where people are in this journey to begin the process of going what after we call OT, the operational side of technology. You'll hear the term IoT, but it's really beginning to do what IT's been doing for a number of years, actually probably a couple of decades, 2 decades at least, where they're standardizing, which is really hard in the industrial space, but it's also gaining an inventory of the assets that you have. So what do I have, and what's the weaknesses associated with it, and what is it communicating with, so I can determine how to protect it, right? And then once I've gained that information, I can start the detection conversation around, okay, what's the anomalies and behaviors with this environment to determine that this remote access is okay, or this change to this application was okay, or this new asset that came in is okay, right? And if you do have an event that, how do you respond to it? Do you practice for it, right? Do you go to simulation locations where you set up a mock environment and teach your people on how to respond to an event that's going on inside of your environment, especially around the control system side? I know most organizations do it from an IT perspective, but do you do it holistically if you have industrial control systems with your environment, right? Are you exercising the same amount of due diligence to secure and protect the control systems, the OT world, as you do the enterprise, right? Those are the challenges that a lot of organizations are starting to grapple with, right? And then how do you recover from that? And those playbooks, are they developed and in place and being used, at some regular interval to keep the exercise and the responses that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. They know what tools they need to have. They know what information, communications to different groups, et cetera. So again, a NIST framework is a really good framework to follow. Most of your IT organizations may be doing this. Now we just got to get the OT organizations on the industrial side in line with that. So on these mandates, right? So as you create security segments and these tools, Cisco CyberVision is an excellent tool for being able to determine which business class applications, administration applications, rail systems like something like a PTC, the positive train control, connected services, which is your network, your industrial control systems. Those are groups of assets that are similar in nature in what it is that they're doing, whether it's the applications, the systems, the infrastructure they run on. How do you set security controls around that, right? So do you have them in specific zones, and do you have them surrounded by security measures to determine how you're going to prevent and allow communications amongst those environments, right? So network segmentation is really key. Alex or Josh, is there anything you guys would want to add to that from a Cisco perspective and what you guys normally would be involved with?
I think maybe I'll pick up on something there, and Josh, chime in if you'd like. The first step is establishing an IDMZ, so a firewall, a border between the OT and the IT systems. It's important, but that's necessary but not sufficient. In order to really solve for the OT security that we need, and the mandates call this out, you need to move further down the stack towards the industrial edge, towards the process it's running. So towards the train control system, towards the signaling network, towards the dispatch system, because those are critical cyber systems that run the business. And often the attack surface, the attack vector, is between those systems in the field rather than north-south, as we call it in networking, rather than from the OT through the IT system to the world. So we want to segment IT from OT. we also want to be able to go down into the different OT networks and understand exactly how they're behaving, baseline them, and then we can put in a more tailored and appropriate policy to reduce the risk between those critical cyber systems. So I'd say, just to say what we're seeing in rail and elsewhere, the IDMZ is important, but you have to go beyond that to really solve for the problem that we're seeing in the field.
Right. Yeah, it's like we view it as kind of an intrusive prescription, right? Meaning that if you're going to start permitting and denying conversations with this environment, you have to know what the side effects are of that prescription in order to determine what the risk is that's associated with it, right? Because sometimes you can do more harm to yourselves not realizing it by the measures in which you enact. So, and you mentioned something earlier, Alex, which was really relevant. COVID really kind of kicked the door open with gaining remote access into these environments because people couldn't travel, they couldn't get to these facilities or access to these systems. So they were given remote access, right? And then, what is the best mousetrap for remote access into that environment? VPN is not necessarily the best tool for a control system environment. And so you have to start looking at what technologies are relevant for industrial control systems if you're going to gain access to that stuff, right? And then you have to be able to monitor it. This is never a one and done. Don't ever look at control systems as a static environment. They're very dynamic. There's things constantly changing within that space. And a lot of executives that we talk to, they don't recognize that because they don't work with it every day, right? When you talk about process integrity, if somebody makes a change to a PLC, was that warranted and should it have been done? Does anybody even know that it was done by the proper authorities within the organization to even do that, right? And so the only way you'd be able to track through that is to have systems that are sitting out there and watching for that type of stuff, right? And again, a new asset coming, new application coming, a change to a file, change to a PLC program, all of those things need some amount of visibility in order to keep things in check, right? And that's part of what these assessments are about and what these cybersecurity tools are for. So, Cisco CyberVision is designed and built specifically for the OT environment, right? And so you got to look at it from that lens to determine, well, what is my control system environment? What are my PLC architectures that are out there? What does my industrial control system network configuration look like in the topology to it, in the architecture? So if you have to understand all of that stuff in order to go in there and secure it and protect it. Next slide. So best practices. Yep. So foundation. Alex, do you have anything you want to add before I move on, or you good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So on the guidelines, right? So if you look again to the IT side, well established, been at it for quite a while, got the tools, got the people, got the resources, got a budget structure, as far as how they run that side of the business. We got to start mimicking that on the OT side, right? And start developing organizationally, transparent, aligned, collaborative, working between IT and OT in this space to be able to determine what are those guidelines. If you have specific guidelines on the IT side, can they apply to the OT side? They might. Policies for sure, right? How you use those technologies to get that information, asset inventory. IT is really good at asset inventory. They know their SBOMs, they know what their hardware assets are, they know their networking infrastructure pretty well. On the industrial side, it could be a wide range of things. There's proprietary systems out there. A lot of the stuff they buy come from OEMs and system integrators that bring in these machine centers and these technologies that they deploy across these rail yards. Again, critical infrastructure, manufacturing, same. It's no different. To me, I don't look at rail any different than I would look at water, wastewater, power, or a manufacturer, a refinery, for example, right? There's control systems in there that's managed and run by a group of people who buy from their ecosystem of automation and technology vendors to run and operate their particular environment. So whether it's a rail system or whether it's a refinery, even though that what their end results may be different, the technologies that they use are not, right? And so you want to gain visibility to that stuff. That's the very first thing you want to do, as I mentioned earlier. And you want to segment. Once you learn what those assets are, what their weaknesses are, You know who needs to talk to who, what languages are they using, determine what you can patch, what you can't patch, and then you can start building out your security segmentation based on the data points that you collect by really understanding that environment, right? And then developing an incident response plan. And that's key. There's tabletop exercises that can be done that we provide. There's playbooks that can be developed. You know, settling in on a framework that you can use. Again, what NIST is a really good one. IEC 6243 is good for the industrial control system pieces. And there's a couple other based on your regulatory requirements as the TSA is mandating here to the rail industry because they know how critical it is to determine, you know, how good are you? Are you better today than you were yesterday, right? Are you getting better? That's what they're trying to do here. That's why they're pushing these mandates through is we're trying to get to a level of can we get better today than we were yesterday? Go ahead and flip. I'll leave this one to you guys real quick while I take a drink of water. And if not, I'll be back in a second.
Yeah, thanks, Dino. So as Alex alluded to, asset visibility is really critical, but where you kind of gain that visibility is just as important. So Cisco provides some industrial security reference architectures to help you build that solution, both in terms of where you're going to be doing that detection, where things live within the Purdue model. Are they doing detection at the zone and cell and level, or up in the industrial zone and at the distribution layer? So just understand that we have CVDs or Cisco validated designs to help design, architect, and deploy some of these security solutions. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch.
Yeah. And those CVDs are, they're Cisco validated designs, but some of your automation technology vendors have also partnered with Cisco and following along that model, right? So don't just think that Cisco is the only one driving this. They have automation technology partners that are a part of their ecosystem driving this architecture and this model. So the Purdue model, which this kind of lays out here, the way they described it, and you can look it up. And when I say Purdue, the University of Purdue, not the guys that do chicken, provide this architecture, and it's been around for a couple decades, right? It kind of gives you the boundaries of what a manufacturing and/or critical infrastructure fits for them too, on how assets are laid out inside these environments, right? So from the lowest level of the cell zone line process area, as you make your way up through to the manufacturing business system environment where there's an IDMZ, and then you make your way to corporate and then up and through the enterprise into the internet, right? And those boundaries, those security zones, and there's security zones even within these cell and area and process areas. So you got to think of it in the context in the train industry. It's like you have the engines, but then you have the yards. And so those would be very different security zones that you would create between those assets versus the assets that are running the yard versus the assets that are actually moving those trains that are running those engines, right? So,
exactly. And even within, so we want to get as finely segmented as is reasonable. And one of the fundamental tenets of doing this properly is to respect the OT systems, right? And rail has a long culture of safe operation for good reason. Right? It's methodical. And we want to make sure that as we're bringing technologies to prevent unanticipated and unwanted movement of an attacker, malicious or otherwise, from one area of the network to another, that we don't take down the OT network. We want to use passive sensors. So we want to listen to what's happening as close to where it's happening so that we can understand who's talking to what, make sure it looks as it should. And if we see something anomalous, we can say, oh, well, that makes sense. We did a maintenance patch 2 years ago and we didn't close the door, and now those things are talking. We know it, we see it, we can put that in an area that doesn't affect everything else while we fix it. Maybe there's a critical system that runs the network, not the IT network, not the telecoms network, but runs the rail network, that just can't be changed for a period of time because site access, capital budgets, it just can't be touched. We can ring fence that around that particular process. So maybe it's a train control application, maybe it's an overlay signaling network, maybe it's a power distribution for electrified track. We will touch it, we will change it in the future, but while we're working on that, planning to do it safely, we can make sure that the camera system, that the sensing system, that the other things that are in that area are not polluting that environment. So we want visibility to move those different processes that run the business into as small a zone as possible. And what you see here are a step-by-step guide based on that reference architecture and based on that validated design to be able to bring your visibility as close to the process as possible, make the zones as small as practicable, and do it in a way without having to wholesale change your OT network, which is just impractical.
And the reality of it too is, and from an OT perspective, there's a lot of folks that believe when these systems first go in, they go in isolated, gapped, right? And maybe they did. Digital transformation, Industry 4.0, COVID with remote access, just somebody, we've gotten these systems so close to each other, it's not very hard to all of a sudden connect up a control system network to the business system network because they are that close to each other. And a lot of folks will just assume that it is still that way. I will tell you, as a practitioner working in, I'm not even going to tell you how many sites, but it's been a whole lot. I never find that. Never do I find an air gap system. The only one that I would say that I trust it's air gap just because of the way they manage it and do it is like nuclear power plants. The rest of them, it can be a free for all, right? Especially when you're looking at assets that have been out there that is measured in decades, not just a few years, right? So industrial assets are around for a long time, and they don't have safety in mind when they were developed and put out there. And it doesn't take much to connect them up. I find wireless and cellular dongles hanging off of PLCs, right? I do, right? For an environment, because the maintenance guy or the process engineer doesn't want to have to come in or have to go out there, so they'll make it easy on themselves and they'll open that up. And IT will never see that. They'll never see that out there because they don't see that PLC and what's connected to it. So what I'm trying to stress here is just because somebody thinks it's air gap, don't turn your back on it. You want to be able to prove reliably, demonstratively, just like the TSA saying, demonstrate and show that you have visibility to these things. And not just because you got it on a piece of paper that says, yeah, I have this, Rockwell PLC version XYZ. It's like, okay, what's it doing today? What did it do yesterday? What's it doing today? Right? So don't assume that they're isolated just because somebody tells you that. That's very, very rare. You have to be in a highly regulated environment for that to happen, in my view, from what I've seen. So I just wanted to get that out there. All right. Well, I'll let you talk to this one, Josh.
Yeah, so this is a complicated slide with all the different threat vectors and tools to combat each one. And the reason it's so complicated is security isn't a product, it's a solution. Whether it's a laptop in your finance department or a PLC in your rail yard, they're all threat vectors and they all need protecting uniquely based on what that asset is doing, how it's communicating, and to what it's communicating to. So I think this is a build out, if you'll hit next slide. So what we're really talking about is the industrial side. So there's a lot of IT tools built for securing networks that IT is already utilizing, but they don't necessarily understand industrial protocols. And so what we're really talking about is how do we secure those industrial assets just like we would if it was a laptop in finance.
So this here is kind of giving where are you in the journey, right? And kind of giving a percentage breakout. And I believe this is not more so than just the rail, right? I'm guessing this is OT general, all verticals in the manufacturing, critical infrastructure space, moving along on where are they in this journey, right? And it's it's been one of those things. I think it's been a little slow moving per se, and a lot of it's because of resources, capital, budget requirements. Because you got to get a change to how you appropriate funds to go after this, and then you're having to bring somebody to the table that normally isn't at the table, and that is your OT teams. And that's just not your internal staff, but that's the external staffs, the folks that they work with, the people that they buy from, their ecosystem of automation technology suppliers that bring them their various tool sets that they use to run rail, right? So everything from the yards to the trains themselves and everything else along that rail system that they use is who needs to be involved in these discussions, because a lot of times we have to get the OEM or the SI to the table in order to figure out what is it that you're doing to help support this? How do you gain access? And if you do need to solve a problem, how do you do that? How do you show up on site with your laptop and plug it into their environment, or do you remote in? What do you change when you do that? There's a lot of things that, what's this technology capable of giving us that we want out of it? So there's an ongoing dialogue that needs to happen in order to determine how you can best build the security posture around these particular assets. So
and one of the things, yeah, and go back to, so this one's instructive, right? So survey of the industrial market, and this rings true with every rail operator we're working with, is everybody sees the need, right? We have CISA, we have the whole industry is saying, let's raise the bar and let's keep that bar, raising at a speed that everybody stays above it, right? That's the intent of the mandates. That's the intent of what CISA is doing, and we see this globally in other areas. But it's hard. And as I said before, we got to respect that the OT systems are legit. They were designed for a purpose. They've been working. They work for a long time. Rail is probably one of the market sectors that has justifiably is really proud of things that still run from 1920, because they designed it with that level of durability and fail-safe and redundancy. So there is a reluctance to modify those networks for good reason, right? There's also some challenges in demonstrating value of all of this noise around cyber, demonstrating business value in solving for this problem. Yes, there's a regulatory minimum we need to meet. Somebody's yelling at us and we need to say yes, but how do we change the process? How does that affect my budget? And so we see as challenges demonstrating the value of OT security. The biggest challenge that our customers are reporting is that scaling is the biggest challenge. To getting enough data at scale across the infrastructure quickly so we can see the current state of the network. We can bring documentation back to OT and say, this is how your things are actually talking to each other, because we're watching rather than what it looked like when it was designed. Are there dongles out there, to Dino's point? Are there PLCs that need to be patched? Are there processes that are talking in a way you didn't expect? And so what we're trying to help our customers do is get to that scale quicker, bringing in IT tools that make it easier to react, to automate, to segment things around, but using the network itself as a sensor so that we can use the networking gear that has to be there anyway to provide connectivity to show to solve for that visibility. I think we have some slides on this here, but it's really this inflection point in the market right now in where you do that inspection matters. And we talked about the validated designs. Happy to follow up with people on this webinar or others of your colleagues with Velta to help assess, the strategy you're on today. If it's the right one, how can we help you go faster? If there's some adjustments that could be made to make it more efficient. But the location matters, and then going to scale matters too. It's super expensive operationally and financially to put in certain technologies. Like there's many ways to get visibility. Cisco isn't the only company that makes one, but getting visibility at scale is really, really hard because you don't want to change the OT network. You definitely don't want to break it. You definitely don't want to do something that could risk taking it down, because that's where the money is made. As one of our rail customers said the other day, we're IT. We count the money in here. We make the money out there in OT. And so that's what we need to make sure that's the most important piece of our business. We need to make sure that works. So getting to that network visibility, which allows you to mature your cybersecurity model and be mandate compliant at scale, is hard. And some of our solutions are designed specifically to address that problem. Dino, are you seeing this as a challenge in other organizations in getting to scale?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Can you go back 2 slides? I want to touch on something really quick that you kind of so this deep packet inspection, right? It matters because it's done passively. Control system networks, we don't want to be disrupted, right? And a lot of IT tools and IT behaviors are very disruptive. They scan ports, they scan devices, they scan the network. They in a way, without even realizing it, because business systems can handle that extra traffic. It's almost like we created an internal denial of service attack. We see it all the time, right? Because security and the networking team, this is what they do. They've got Rapid7 or whatever they bought, and they're out there scanning the network, and it's tripping the control systems. Send them to COM fault, machine stops for safety reasons or whatever the reason. It can't communicate in a timely manner, so it will stop. And so deep packet inspection matters. 1, it's passive. 2, it's building a storyline on what's going on inside of that environment. And what makes Cisco really unique in this entire space of all the tools that I've worked with for the last several years is they can collect this metadata in band. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see here, one of the things that IT hates, and I don't blame them, I don't like it either, is this out-of-band span network sprawl that you normally would have to create in order to get to these industrial assets passively, right? There's a lot of extra ports that are required, cabling that are required, if you're going to use a span solution to go and get to that metadata at that industrial control system level, versus having Cisco technology out there that's acting as a switch and doing what it does. But it also has the ability to sit there and collect that information and send it in band and send it to tools like Cisco CyberVision, right? To create that passive, undisruptive data collection of that environment. So it's a very attractive, elegant way of getting to devices out in these industrial environments without having to go spend a lot of money building separate cabling media solutions to get into that environment. Josh, anything you want to touch on that?
No, you nailed it. But yeah, the location does matter because in control systems, the majority of the traffic is going to be east-west. So if you're doing that deep packet inspection higher up in the stack, you're going to miss that visibility at the asset layer.
Yeah, good point. East-west traffic is within that zone. Here, this is what we're trying to get to, right? The whole IT/OT convergence discussion is this slide here, right? How do you get these critical teams all on the same page? As I said earlier, transparent, aligned, collaborative, in order to pull this off. And that means 2 things have to happen. OT people need to understand a little bit more about cybersecurity, practices and procedures and policies. And IT people need to understand process and safety. And so, that's the key, right? So if we can get those 2 to working together, this is going to go a lot further faster than if they're polarizing to each other. And I've seen that too, where they don't, the kids sometimes don't always want to play well together for various reasons, whether past history, past, activities, current things that are going on, whatever it might be, the organizational structure, the way that it's set up today can cause conflict. So the goal here is we got to get everybody on the same page and working together and pulling the same direction. So how can we help? To help you get your compliance security frameworks. We can definitely help develop that security framework. Again, identification, detection, protection, respond, and recover. We can help you develop the playbooks, tabletop exercises along those way to get everybody on the same page, identify the gaps. That a lot of times, sometimes as we're going through a tabletop exercise and you start showing panels of control systems, the PLCs and drives and the networking equipment down there, a lot of the executives sometimes think when you hear cybersecurity, IT has it, till you show the devices and the assets we're really talking about, and IT will pause. They'll they'll blink, and the executives are like, well, wait a minute, I thought you were the cybersecurity guys. and OT's like, well, it's not my job. Well, it's not your job. Whose job is it, right? So tabletop exercises will bring that stuff to the forefront, right? You probably have incident response plans already. This is just adding, the industrial piece into that incident response plan. And then what we really are good at as practitioners is developing that accurate asset inventory. That's what we really are good at going out there and doing, is helping you get your arms around what you have out there in your environment, right? And then conduct a vulnerability assessment based on the data that's pulled from those assets out of that control system space. Ray, did I forget anything?
Nope. I don't think so. I mean, I think at this point we're open to questions. Any additional questions folks have that may have come in? And Jen, I don't know if you have any that may have come in.
Yes, and I did receive a message that the chat might be blocked for some participants. I don't know if that's something you can see on your end, Lou Ray.
Let me
up in the menu items. I was going to say, go ahead and put the slide deck though back up. Just go to maybe that the speaker slide that shows contact information.
Can you see it?
That we can use for follow-up. Not yet.
Let me.
While Lou Ray is doing that, for Dino or Alex, a question. I know I need to do something. We've talked a lot about the cybersecurity here, but where do you recommend getting started?
Well, as I stated earlier, it's getting that asset inventory, right? I mean, if you're a rail operator, and the question is do you have an up-to-date, accurate asset inventory? That's number one. Number two, are you continuously monitoring those assets? Do you have an OT cybersecurity tool of some sort within your environment today, right? If you're starting really from ground zero, organizationally, what challenges do you have there? Who do you got to get on board to be able to do something, right? Because I've seen a lot of times where we'll find a sponsor within an organization that really wants to go do something, and then they'll move it up the chain, and it'll run into somebody and go, oh, that's not us. We're not doing that. That's IT. Let them go do that. And IT will, they sometimes they'll take the ball, but they can only go so far because, again, getting back to the control systems, it's a hot space, it's a hard space to work in, and then it'll stop. So you got to get, again, that C-suite IT OT team all on the same page. If you have a CISO, what is the CISO's role when it comes to the control systems? And who's he working with, or she working with, on the control system side to gain knowledge and experience and understanding of that space, right? To go ask those questions and get the data that they need so they can help the OT team formulate a budget, formulate a plan, take that to the executive group, and begin this process, right?
Is there a particular, well, knowing that everybody's resource constrained, is there a particular system you would recommend people start with within a rail structure?
Well, if you're a big Cisco shop, Cisco Cybervision is definitely a good starting point, right? If you're using Cisco Industrial, if you're using the 1101 routers, the 3000 series switching platforms, the 9300s, if you have that stuff in place today as a big chunk of your network infrastructure, well, then it's just a matter of spinning up a Cybervision within that environment and start collecting that asset inventory information right out of the gate.
Yeah, I'll give a story. It's a related transportation customer, giant geographic spread, lots of networking gear spread across multiple different jurisdictional districts, running some critical networks. Kind of looks like rail. Had a challenge in visibility. It's exactly as you said, and they were challenging their staff. I'm picking up on what you were saying about getting people talking. Are you monitoring? Well, sure. I know where everything is. Do you really? Maybe. Do you really? Maybe not. And so using the network infrastructure that was already there, it was a matter of weeks that they were able to turn on the sensors, deploy the software to the switches and the routers, turn on the sensors, baseline everything without taking anything down, and come back together and say, this is how our system is actually operating, and have data to drive decisions rather than perception and rather than posturing between the departments. Getting that asset inventory of where things are, what things are on the network, but also how they're talking to each other, it allows everybody to have a common goal to move forward. And without that, you really are in what can be a very messy political battle inside organizations, because you're calling each other's babies ugly. That's not the intent. You just want to know, how is it dressed, and maybe we need to change the color of the shirt. I'll share a story. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it just goes back to something earlier I said, are you exercising the same amount of due diligence to secure and protect the control system environment as you do the enterprise? And you know the answer, whether you're doing that or not, right? Because otherwise you'd be able to show a list of all your PLCs that you have, right? Drives, HMIs, engineering workstations, any machine centers that you have out there, you would have a list of those, and you would know the vulnerabilities of those and where they're connected into the network and who's talking to who. And there are a list of the industrial protocols, which are going to be different than your IT protocols, right? And so you'll know whether you're doing that or not. If you have that, if you said, I want an asset inventory of my rail yard and the trains right now. And is that live, or is that a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old? Was the last time that was done, right? So that's a good starting point, right? Again, NIST framework identification is tenet number 1 in that framework.
And Josh,
I think
on your point on which things in the rail network, it's not for us to say prescriptively that this application is more important than this application. The TSA mandates are saying to the organizations, you name your critical cyber systems, you name the things that if they go down would affect your business. And honestly, a lot of our customers have already done some level of segmentation towards the super critical things. There's also this meaty part of the curve of also very revenue critical or operationally critical that also could be protected. And so again, getting that visibility into how things are connecting allows us to take a data-driven approach to providing moving that segmentation down towards the process edge. A good example, talking with a rail operator recently, they've protected their braking system, the train safety systems, those are protected. They've protected their signaling systems and their dispatch systems, those are protected. But unprotected or less protected than they'd like are the systems that their customers rely on to look for where is the train, where is the container, and how do I make sure that I can track that through the operation. For their customer, that's just as important as knowing that the train is safe operating. And so it's looking at all of the systems that rely on OT to provide business insight and making sure we can segment those out properly and provide visibility to them.
I think we have time maybe for one last question before we wrap. And Alex, coming to you, how are rail companies leveraging their safety culture to address cyber risks?
It's interesting. Many critical industries already have, for very, very good reason. You mentioned nuclear earlier. Rail is similar, right? If you're in rail, you're from the ground up, you're taught safety. Every meeting starts with a safety briefing, right? And tripping hazards, who knows CPR, who's going to call, and that's just how you run the business. We're starting to see, I'll give a shout out to the folks at Amtrak. It's where I first saw it presented by their CISO. In that safety briefing that you're required to do, they've added cybersecurity as a topic. So every day, every employee in the entire company is looking at where are the tripping hazards, what are the machines that could hurt me, what am I going to do in my job to be safe, and what are the cyber risks in this environment. That's a great example of, we are in an industry, when we're talking about rail cybersecurity, it's primed to do this right because it already is a safe culture. This is just another level of solving for safety. It's a great question, but I think that, certain markets are resistant. Rail is able and ready to do this. It just needs help scaling because it's a big, complicated systems.
And it's across all verticals, right? Safety is always job one. That's priority one in every single location of safety. Unplanned and scheduled downtime is number two, disruption, right?
Exactly.
So that's the two priorities across all of those industries, all those verticals. That's 1 and 2. The goal here is how do we get you all the information you need to understand from a digital perspective? You can talk about physical safety. Let's talk about digital safety, right? Which is really what we're talking about here in this particular arena is digitally, how do we make sure that this stuff is safe?
Any more questions, Jen, or are we good?
We're good.
Okay. Well, once again, I want to thank you all for being part of this very insightful, informative webinar. And we will send a follow-up email with a link to the replay in the event that you want to pass it on to someone else or want to rewatch it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.